Good evening all, and welcome. If all of you are prepared and have your gear ready, it's time for you to join me for a walk in the woods. I'm sure it will be an unforgettable night. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I was doing a long hike from Springer Mountain to Fontana Dam that's about 165 miles. I was a little behind schedule on day 3, where I had planned to take a near zero day and spend some time at mountain crossings. Initially, I was going to spend night 2 in the hostel there, but a big storm prevented me from crossing Bloody Mountain the day before. As a result, I had to revamp my plan and add about 7 miles to my day. So after a soda and a burger at Mountain Crossing, I hit the trail again. I came to a road crossing, and there's this guy with an old 80s style external frame pack taking a break. Being me, I stopped, pulled out a Cliff Bar and a smoke, and decided to have a conversation for a bit. I could use the break anyway. We talked for a bit, and I alluded to which shelter I was heading to. Do not do this if you don't trust the person. That was my first mistake. The guy seemed a little odd, but this was the Appalachian Trail. Everyone is weird. At that point, we're all walking to Maine. We started talking about 1 p.m. He had started his day at Neal's Gap, and I started on the other side of Blood Mountain. We'd started at roughly the same time, and I had taken a 2-hour break. My pace easily put me ahead of this guy by 7 or 8 miles. The shelter I had alluded to was actually out of his range, or so I thought. There were also 3 shelters between us and my final destination. We parted ways and I kept on trucking. I get to camp and do my usual thing. I made good time, so I actually had quite a bit of downtime before hike at midnight, which is 8 p.m. Several hours had passed, and I had peppered for the night, and was reworking my plan while talking to the other hikers, and this guy rolls into camp, looking like he had just gone on the Bataan Death March. He trucked it up to try and catch me up. The guy started to show his true colors in camp. He was really loud and obnoxious, and would not leave me alone. I decided that night I would carry a bit of extra water and do breakfast outside of camp to try and distance myself away from him. The next morning, I was up just before sunrise. I packed and hit the trail. Then, 2 miles later, I tweaked my knee on some rock crossing. Ugh, that did it. I needed to get some rest and ice on this thing. I go to the gap where you can either hitch west into Hiawassee, where most people go, or hitch east into Helen. I decided to go into Helen as I figured I'd also take advantage of the Bavarian atmosphere that the town provides. Lo and behold, a few hours later this same guy comes rolling into my hotel. I found out later he had asked some southbounders about me and figured out where I'd gone. Holy crap. Now this is creepy. I had to get him away from me. I figured, while in town, I'd kill him with kindness. So I got some beers and made some more conversation. We were talking about our plans, and I knew this was my chance. I told him that because of my knee, I was probably gonna take the next day off as well, and continue on after that. He said he'd join me, just like I expected. I said cool and went to my room. As soon as I got to my room, I packed up and set my alarm for 4:30 a.m. I phoned the owner of the hotel to make sure she could give me a ride to the trail that early. The next morning, I quietly grabbed my gear and hopped into her car. We headed the few miles up the road to the trailhead, and I basically started running. I never saw the guy again, but I heard stories about him up the trail. That was a hell of a trip. I had a bear bed down within arm's reach of me in my tent. That's a story for another day though. I haven't done a long hike in a few years. Telling these stories really does make me want to get back into the trail. Perhaps I will, in summer. I found some cheap train tickets to Luxembourg, and being the adventurous person I am, decided to book last minute and go all by myself. Due to some unfortunate and lack of planning circumstances, I ended up on that train to Luxembourg with nothing to wear for the weekend except the clothes on my back. I figured it was no big deal. How boring would it have been for everything to have gone according to plan? Anyway, Luxembourg City is quite small, and after 2 days I had pretty much seen most of what I wanted to see. A quick Google search showed me that there was a beautiful forest some kilometers north of the city. I thought it looked perfect, so I bought a day train pass and set out on my journey. I managed to make it there, and it was gorgeous. I wasn't really dressed for hiking since I had no clothes or shoes with me at the time, but didn't want to miss out on such an amazing experience. So I ventured into the forest anyway. I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and ballet flats for shoes. I had told myself I'd stay close to the area and not do any crazy rock climbing or anything, and nothing would go wrong. Boy, was that a dumb assumption to make. I was about 45 minutes away from where I started walking. There was no one else around, and I walk along a sharp turn, and there's a lady walking towards me. She was probably 45 or so, and seemed quite plain. As we approached each other, she suddenly says, "That's not okay." I ignore this, as I try to ignore people on the street as much as possible, and continue walking. She has reached the point of being right next to me now, and as she passes, she says, "You can't do this." There's no one else around, so she has to be talking to me. I reluctantly turn towards her and ask, "Pardon me?" She says, "How dare you show up here like this?" I think she has me confused for someone else. I offer her an apology and continue, but she follows. "Don't you understand? You're ruining it." I say nothing. What the hell am I supposed to say? I see some big branches close by that I could perhaps use as a weapon if I need to. I don't even know what's going on at this point. She's screaming now, repeating it's all sacred and my shoes are ruining the sacredness of the forest. I stand my ground, offer one more apology, and she tells me I'm going to regret it. I don't know why, but I told her that I had nothing else to wear, trying to justify myself, I suppose. Then she tells me it doesn't matter. I'm starting to feel relieved. Maybe she'll leave me alone. "The forest is protected. Do you know who protects it?" she says. "No." Realistically, where can I run? Nowhere. Who can I call? No one. So I have to face this lady at all times. I don't want her attacking me from behind or something. She proceeds to tell me that Jesus Christ is protecting the forest. I nod. Sounds about right. She repeats that it doesn't matter to her anymore that I'm wearing ballet flats. She then says that Jesus and God know, since she told them. She tells me that God will not let me leave the forest. Pardon? And she tells me slowly that God knows I have forsaken the forest and that I am a traitor and a sinner. She tells me that I'm not going to make it out and that I will never leave. God will never let me. That he sees me here, ruining the sacredness of the forest, and he sent her to find me, that I had my chance, and that he will dish out the punishment that I deserve. I nod. I'm kind of scared, but at least she has left it up to God to punish me, so I should be safe. I just need her to walk away. We hold eye contact for a long 45 seconds, and then she turns and carries on. I stay where I am, slowly back up into a tree, and wait while I watch her leave. I was afraid she had some nearby friends, so I wanted my back up against something to make me feel safer. She was still within earshot when I heard her say, "He won't let you leave. You know nothing you can do can change that." She kept walking and never turned back. I waited 15 minutes with my back to that tree, then slowly kept going and never saw her again. Religious fanatic in the Mullathal forest? Let's not meet again. As most teenagers are, I was pretty reckless with my own safety. I knew about people being taken and people being killed, but I thought I was invincible and doubted anything would ever happen to me. At the same time, I was quite receptive, paranoid, and aware of my surroundings, just not educated enough. Being this naive comes with its fair share of dangerous situations. From ages 12 to 17, I preferred to go out in the dark. It felt more exciting. I would frequently go out for long walks with my best friend, who is a year younger than me, and if I wasn't with her, I'd tell my mom I was, so that she wouldn't worry. We never really had specific destinations, I just loved to walk. And at the latest stages, despite my previous experiences, I would walk town to town, frequenting particular benches or deserted places. Stupid, I know. This experience I shared with my friend when I was around 14 and her 13. One of our regular daytime spots was a well-known area of my town, hard to miss. Huge chalk hills and woods with miles of fields and farm. A very strange sight amongst the businesses, homes, council estates, miles of roads and shopping centres surrounding it. As you can imagine, a beautifully quiet place to visit to get away from the rush and mounds of other humans, and instead watch it from afar. It tended to only be dog walkers and the occasional jogger that frequented these areas, and apart from teenage parties, which were few and far between in this area of the hills, I'd never heard of much crime occurring here. One evening, we walked to a park we liked to chill in. I cringe thinking about this place too. It was huge and fenced in behind lines of houses, and was locked at a certain time each night. It was the most remote and lesser-known park in an area that had many of a similar size, mostly due to being hard to find, and it held an even lesser-known passage to the hills. We hung around in the park for a bit in the darkness of winter, got bored and decided that we would go for a stroll across the fields, maybe even try to get into our little den that we had built there one summer, for some much desired adrenaline. From past experiences going with groups, there were rarely ever people there after dark. Probably because it wasn't very well lit. We took the path and joked around on the field under the hills, wandering around, when we noticed a short, stocky man with a limp in the distance. I instantly got a strange feeling about him, and it wasn't my usual fight or flight anxiety I got with your regular human. It was pure, get your little ass down that path and to somewhere safe anxiety. He seemed to stop and turn around and walk a bit, and then turn back towards us and walk a bit closer, then change his mind over and over, and then he stopped again and turned towards us, and as if on a mission, headed in our direction. We headed straight for the path. We started slow, nervously giggling, and looked behind ourselves and realized this man was really gaining despite his limp. It just didn't feel right at this point, so we ran. We ran through the unlit park, which at this point had multitude of bats flying across, just to add to the allure of it, and we looked behind us. He was still following. When we were at the gate exiting, he just started to cross the grass. Now this wasn't the only way to the main road. It was muddy and dark and occasionally locked, but in our worry I don't even think that crossed our minds. Looking back, most rational thinking adults probably wouldn't go this way behind two little girls. They'd follow the path that went around the outside one instead. We went this way because to us it seemed the quickest, and already in an unsafe situation. It didn't seem as dangerous as this stranger catching up. We ran down the road, crossed the traffic lights and slowed down. We were next to a pub, so we felt safe. We rationalized it. I mean, it could be a coincidence, as he was just walking in the same direction as us. But at the same time, we still wanted to get home without him knowing where we lived, so we continued forward at a fair pace. Again, looking back as we walked, this man was still staggering after us, and he looked tired. Why didn't he slow down or stop? Nothing added up. We were down a dark, empty road, and were unnerved once again. It was about 3/4 of a mile until we got to some 24-hour shop, so we decided we would run it. The sooner we were around with other people, the better. We just about made it to a shop, hid behind a passport photo machine, and looked towards the road where we'd left the man behind. In these few seconds, I felt rational again, and imagined that he would just continue his rushed walk all the way to his home. But instead, he stopped at the crossing and inspected the roads. He was looking for us, and looked every way we could have gone. He was searching for something, and it certainly wasn't a car. He decided on a street, and as fast as he could drag his dodgy leg, he attempted to trail after us. Me and my mate were shaken. We couldn't understand why he was following us, but we knew that he almost certainly was. After a few minutes, we decided to try and confirm what was happening, and peeked down the road he went down. We could see him clearly annoyed, looking down each side road and turning in circles, desperately looking for a sign of where we went. We left him there, and hurried home in the opposite direction, only taking the main roads. The next day at school, we told the story to our friends at lunchtime, and everyone agreed it was weird. He must have followed us at least 1.5 miles in the end, which was a long distance. Just for comical value, although reasonably irrelevant, I'll add that just as lunch ended, a janitor with a strikingly similar limp and of same body type walked into the cafeteria. Myself and my friends just looked at each other and for a short while convinced ourselves that it was him. We still talk about it now and wonder what his intentions were. I wonder more about what he would have done if he had caught up to us at the shops or pub. I most likely now think he was just trying to scare us, either because that made him feel something, or because he wanted us to not endanger ourselves like that again. But I think that just might be my naivety shining through. I can't say I was a lot more careful after that experience, but I am glad to still be here, and much more educated and aware now. All I can say is, I never went back to those hills after dark, and wouldn't recommend it either. A few months back, my girlfriend and I were bored hanging out around the house, and spontaneously decided to go out for a hike. We don't go hiking often, but the idea appealed to the both of us, and even though there was only about an hour left of light, we figured we had enough time to go and enjoy a hike before it got too dark. We quickly filled up our water bottles and put on the best walking shoes we had, and were out of the door driving up into the mountains. Around my area, there are many hiking trails, with the variety of trails increasing as you go up the mountain. We tended to stay around the base of the mountain in the occasional case that we'd do a hike, where most people would still be walking. But we wanted to change things up, and progressed further up the mountain road to a trail a friend of mine had mentioned. We kept in mind our time, and figured that we could hike for a bit and simply enjoy the new environment, and finish up before it got too late. We arrived at the trailhead, and see that there were no cars left along the road where the trail commences. We didn't think too much of it though due to the time. We still had a good 45 minutes until dark, so we trooped on. We started walking down a fairly steep hill that then recoups the elevation at the bottom, with an equally steep hill that you have to ascend. We reach the top, and then it's smooth sailing from there on out. We see a lone coyote off the trails a way off, and some rabbits, and I made a quip about how those rabbits might need to be careful with that coyote lurking around. She playfully hit me for that one. Approximately less than a mile into the trail, we see a large fallen tree that made a bridge over a dried riverbed, and decided to take a rest, climb around on it, and take pictures. We were there for roughly 10 minutes, and then resumed hiking. We continue on the trail for a short distance, until she hears a rustle in the trees behind us. We stop, mildly spooked, due to the assumed size of whatever made the rustling, but continue on only briefly before she decides she's done and that we need to head back. It's twilight now, so I agree with her, so we turn around and head back to the car. When we made it back to the fallen tree, my shoe had come untied, so I used the trunk to fix my loose laces and look behind us for the first time on the hike, which is uncharacteristic of me, but hey, I was having fun and there was no need to be paranoid. I see a person dressed entirely in black, with their hood on. That was a significant distance behind us, walking at a slow, even pace. It wasn't something out of the ordinary, so what if they're wearing black with their hood on? I wear black most of the time, and it's cold out. I shouldn't make assumptions, right? This does trigger me to be more alert, however, and I inform my girlfriend of this person's presence. It's dusk now. We continue on at an intentionally faster pace and go through a winding section of the trail, and I lose sight of the person. When we come around the final bend of the section, I figure that they're far behind us now, and that there's nothing to worry about. Sooner than later, the person is behind us again, but significantly closer, probably 50 feet in comparison to 100 feet before. And we had increased our speeds, so this alarmed us. We briskly walked around another bend, and as soon as we had come around it, we book it. It seemed to be a natural reaction on both our parts, as we started running without a word to initiate it. We're nearing the trailhead now, with only the hills to deal with. We catch our breaths for a moment, and I turn around again. I see the person seemingly halt in a sprint upon noticing me look back, as if they were trying to uphold the illusion that they were simply walking. At this point I shout, "Go!" and we sprint down the hill. What little light was left struggled to make its way through the dense trees surrounding us, and the steep hill proved challenging to run down without a clear path to be seen. We stumbled down the hill, almost falling multiple times and slamming our feet onto the rocks and loose brush. But we didn't fall, and we didn't look behind us. We make it to the bottom, but must continue up the initial hill, and then we would have made it out. We persevere up the incline and make it back to our car. I briefly breathe in relief as I start my car, heart pounding and adrenaline racing as I reverse onto the road. The person emerges at the trailhead, apparently breathing heavily. We finally catch a glimpse of him. His hood had fallen off his head, exposing his pale complexion and dead eyes that were only illuminated by a single lantern at the start of the trail. He was holding something in his hand, but it was too dark to see, and I was not interested in sticking around to make out the object. I shift into drive and accelerate as fast as my car could muster, leaving him behind in the dust of the empty side of the road. Night trail dude, let's not meet again. My husband and I are amateur mushroom hunters. 3 seasons out of the year, we spend weekends in forests, along nature trails and rivers, looking for edible and interesting wild mushrooms to harvest. Springtime brings the most exciting hunt, which is for the highly coveted morels. We know of a special stretch of shoreline along the river that has a few dozen morels each year. It's difficult to get to, as it's off the proper path, and you have to do quite a bit of ducking, climbing, and maneuvering to get to it. One day, 2 years ago, we were doing just that, making our way slowly and searching carefully for the mushrooms hiding in plain sight. We were so preoccupied with our task that we did not know how long we were being watched or followed. But at one point, we saw a man up ahead of us, looking at us and not saying anything or moving, almost like he was waiting to be noticed. My husband saw him first and turned to shoot me a look, because we never encountered anyone in that spot before. It was besides a small and fairly busy park, but people didn't stray from the paved paths much. There was a weird energy about the man that can be best described as vaguely menacing. We were near the end of where we wanted to look. Anyway, so we turned around and started walking our way back. When we looked behind us a few moments later, the man was gone. We wrote it off as just some weirdo, perhaps a homeless guy whose territory had been wandered into. We continued looking over the spots we had already covered in case we'd missed any morels, with me in front and my husband right behind me, looking back every few places as we were feeling more paranoid as we went along. All of a sudden, I look up from the ground at my feet and the man is blocking our path about 30 feet ahead. He had to have taken the riverbank and crept up alongside us on the path in order to get ahead of us, so that he could cut us off the way he had. I whipped around with huge eyes at my husband, who looks over my shoulder, sees him, and starts to move up the hill on our right as the riverbed was to our left, grabbing my hand to pull me with him. Adrenaline shot us out of the thick brush and onto the paved path in the open park. Without speaking, we broke into a sprint towards the direction of our car, several blocks away. When we were far enough away from the riverbank to risk a backwards glance, we saw the man emerge from the brush. He just stood there watching us leave, motionless. We speculated the entire ride home what he wanted from us, knowing it was nothing innocent. To this day it still bothers me, and I wonder what would have happened if we had been spread apart further while we hunted, or if either of us had been alone. I don't think I want to find out. Let me set up stage. At the time, I was living in Traverse City, Michigan. Beautiful landscape for those wondering. Huge glacier-carved hills and Lake Michigan at your back. I rented a little townhouse with a long-time friend, a little ways outside the city. I had just gotten a hold of my old bicycle, which I had shipped up from my old hometown, and I was raring to start riding around. And that's how this all got started. It was my day off, and I decided to save gas and ride my bike into town. I geared up, checked my tires, and roared off. I had been big on riding my bike once upon a time, and it came back like, well, riding a bike. What I didn't notice, however, was how quickly I was moving. If I had been paying attention, I would have realized the constant downward slope I was on, and how, biking back up, would most likely pose a difficulty for my winter-lapsed muscles. But none of that mattered at the time. I made it into town, did some shopping, met up with my roommate for dinner, and generally had a good time till I noticed the sun was setting. I bid my adieus, hopped on my bike, and pedaled off into the sunset. At first I did alright, but that aforementioned incline wore me down. By the time I reached the last leg of my journey, it was pitch black, and I was walking my bike. At which point, the road faced me with a choice. To my left was the regular road, which was lit better, but also a longer trek to get to the townhouse row I occupied. To my right was a more direct route to and from town. I drove it every day, and in fact, had used it to come into town that very same day. It was heavily wooded and unlit, but featuring a shorter route, albeit with a steeper hill. I figured since I was already walking, I might as well just take the shorter, familiar path. So I turned on my bike's headlamp and headed into the even greater darkness of the road through the woods. All went well for a bit. I trudged along and cursed myself for being so stupid and overconfident with my bike. Then I heard it. Footsteps off to my right side in the woodlands. I stood still and they stopped abruptly. There in the blackness, I debated what it might be. But as a veteran of the woods, I hoped it was just local wildlife and continued on. The footsteps started up again. They stopped when I stopped, just a hint later. I started and stopped once more to be sure that I wasn't hearing things. This last time, the steps continued for a solid 10 seconds after I had stopped, making me sure something, or someone, was out there. I still do not know what, though I logically lean towards human, as the gait sounded bipedal and more precise than a quadruped. With this in mind, I weighed my options. If I dropped the bike and ran towards home, it would be far too easy to catch me. The same was even true if I ran back towards town. I was not in any way prepared for a chase, and I didn't want to initiate one. My mind strayed to the utility knife that I always carry in my purse, but I shoved that thought aside. I have enough martial arts training to know the knife was a bad idea, and I was more comfortable taking whoever or whatever was out bare-handed, rather than escalating things with a blade. Instead, I called my roommate who was still in town, gave her my location, and told her what was happening. She told me she'd be there in 10 minutes. I hung up and started walking again. The footsteps started up too, this time faster and clearly out of sync with my own. And that's when I got mad. I have a weird thing where fear makes me angry and hostile, and being followed through the woods had officially punched my buttons from terrified to murderous. So I turned to the woods and roared with a voice I didn't know I had. How about you come out and face me, you piece of crap? I'll rip your stomach open and wear your intestines for a necklace. For the life of me, I don't know where I got the guts or the words for that. It might as well have been a bad move, but the woods were rather abruptly quiet, and nothing came at me. I stayed still, staring hard, ready to beat the ever-loving crap out of anything that moved. But nothing did. Then my roomie came on scene, her headlights almost blinding me as she turned the curve to where I was. I tossed my bike into her car, and we hauled ass somewhere. I collapsed once I got home, vomited from pure nerves, and finally crashed at 3 a.m. And that's my story. Was it a person? An animal? I feel compelled to lean towards the former, if for no better reason than because it sounded like a person walking. And what animal would just be so precise in following and winding me up? But who knows? Maybe I scared the crap out of some poor porcupine. Regardless, I'd rather not encounter it again. I had recently begun helping my mum sell my childhood home, and it sparked the memory of possibly the scariest thing that's happened to me. Me and my friends were 15. I grew up in a subdivision about 20 minutes away from any towns. It was a very safe neighborhood, streetlights on the corners, lots of kids, lots of classmates lived there, and there was never any fear of us walking to each other's houses or staying out after dark. My subdivision was about 3 miles long, and I lived at the very end of it. The last mile is a sharp right turn into a hill and has thick woods along both sides of the street, with 4 houses at the bottom, all surrounded by woods. My friend Maddie lived at the entrance to the subdivision. One year, we got about 8 inches of snow and ice. It shut down the roads, and people were stranded. Schools closed for a week. The first day of this snow, me, Maddie, and Kelly spent the whole day playing. We decided to have a big sleepover at Maddie's house that night. When the sun looked like it might start setting, we started the trek down to my house to get an overnight bag. By the time we'd finished packing, it was dark out. The woods always looked enchanting in the darkness, but it didn't bother us. The 3 of us start walking, joking, enjoying the night air as we cleared the top of the hill. And then we saw something that made us stop in our tracks. A hooded figure, standing on the corner, illuminated only by the streetlights. They didn't move. They stood completely stiff, staring straight ahead. It was unsettling, but it easily could have been a neighbor, so with nervous laughs, we started descending the hill. The figure never moves, staring straight ahead. As we got to the bottom, we could see the hood was fur-lined, and they had some sort of black mask hiding their features. We began to get nervous. At this point, we're even with this person. It's dark now, and there's only one street lamp illuminating the corner. After staring at the figure for a solid 45 seconds, Maddie finally calls out, "Hey, stop messing with us, it's not funny." At this point, the figure moved, only shuffling its feet to turn its body in our direction. They extended their hand towards us. Time stopped, and I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The figure gestured, "Come here," to us, before turning and walked into the woods. We ran as fast as our feet would take us until we reached Maddie's house and deadbolted the door behind us. I stopped at the corner where the figure had been and felt pure fear. There were 2 tracks of footprints, one leading out of the woods and one leading back in. There's this forest near where I live. Flora and fauna is what we call it here. People used to walk through, have picnics, and run in it. I used it to run there with my dad a lot, so I knew the paths quite well. and I usually go there to escape from reality and listen to my iPod. This whole thing started last year. I drove and parked in the parking lot of the place to revise my notes for an exam I had. While I was in the car, this guy was walking around the parking lot and kept passing my car and looking in at me. It was pretty creepy, so I left. Now today I went to the flora and fauna to go for a walk and listen to music. As soon as I pulled into the parking lot, I saw the same creepy guy sitting in his van. I park on the far side of the lot. There are two entrances to flora and fauna, a main one and a side one, and I was parked right next to the side one. I stayed in my car a few minutes and get out and walked through the side entrance, and I noticed that the creepy guy had also gotten out of his van. I decide not to walk down any of the smaller windy paths, and I turn into a small path that leads to the main path you cross right through the flora and fauna. This route I took was kind of unique, as in you wouldn't choose it usually, because you could just take the main entrance that goes directly onto the main path as it was quicker, and I was hoping that it would lead me away from the creepy guy and to an area that had people in it. I noticed that he was taking the same path as me, so I walked faster towards this other woman who is walking on the main path as well. He follows me to the main path too, and I message my friend and let her know what's up, and then call her. I stay behind this woman for about 10 minutes, and the guy is about 5 to 10 meters behind me. I keep glancing sideways to see how close he is. I stay behind this woman for about 10 minutes, and the guy is about 5 to 10 meters behind me. I keep glancing sideways to see how close he is. I get in front of the woman, and I'm about 200 meters from the other side of the flora and fauna, and there's this couple with a pram walking towards us. I look back, and the creepy guy has turned around. I stay on the phone with my friend until I get back to my car, and when I come back to the parking lot, the creepy guy is in his van, which has been moved and was a lot closer to my car. He watches me get in and drive away. So creepy guy, please, let's never meet again. I am a 17-year-old female. I'd like to start off by saying that most consider me an intimidating person by nature. My close friends don't really believe that, but they know that I most definitely do not mess around when it comes to certain situations, whether it's telling someone to piss off, as much as I hate to admit it, or getting physical with someone. I've never really had someone approach me in public, thinking of getting the best of me, if that makes sense. About half a year ago, I was at my then house, rolling some joints with my girlfriend. I live somewhat in the middle of nowhere, and there are lots of trees in my area, and they are also in my backyard. I wouldn't classify it as a whole-ass forest, but it's not small enough to simply be a grove. There's wildlife there though. My girlfriend and I hadn't smoked much that day, and we were home alone, and seeing as we could do anything we wanted, we decided to smoke these while taking a bit of a nature walk. And it seemed like an absolutely amazing idea at the time. My girlfriend sat next to me while I rolled the Harvested God's Gift in the paper. We were talking about random stuff and listening to heavy metal as I focused on rolling those sweet, sweet spliffs. I had finished rolling, and we finally decided to leave my house and walk into the plain woods, which at the time had never been intimidating to me or anyone I'd been in there with, unless they were just major cowards by nature or had anxiety. I have the joints in my pocket. We leave, and we're walking through my backyard towards one of the many trails from my place. I should also mention it was summer, so it was only 7 p.m, and it wouldn't be getting dark for maybe 2.5 to 3 hours. We light up, and for about an hour or so, it's fine. We're just talking, kissing, basic couple stuff, and we're on our second joint, just walking along the paths. Then we see this big, flat rock, like a pancake boulder. Hell yeah! We sit on it and lay down. The two of us sit like that for a while, holding hands and passing the joint between us. Perhaps half-hour after, we start hearing noises. I'd also like to mention at this point that the sun was starting to set, and perhaps there was another 30 minutes of daylight left. And that's when we started hearing the noises. We're obviously really freaked out by the sounds, and internally blamed it on the weed making us a little paranoid. There was wildlife in the forest, as I'd mentioned. We were trespassing in their backyard, so why should we mind a cute bunny family making their way downtown? After a while of silence, we heard a noise that we both know damn well, and it's not an animal. We heard what sounded like someone running a sharp object against a solid but jagged surface, like a rock. It was pretty far away, but somehow it was loud enough that we heard it. It was faint though. We look at each other and immediately sit up. We don't see anything. I stand up and urge her to do the same as well. This most definitely wasn't the forest fairies we had planned on seeing. We stand for a minute or so, and then we hear a big snap, like a tree branch getting stepped on with a ton of force, and then fast footsteps, like some dude sprinting. I freak out and go into panic mode, as I'm wary to admit. And of course, we were deep into the woods. I urge my girlfriend Kimber to run faster, and all the way towards my house. Now, my girlfriend and I aren't exactly sporty people. We're more of the academic bunch, and we weren't completely out of shape, but looking back on it, it would have been a hell of a lot easier for us had we done cross-country or track or something. She runs in front of me, and I'm a little further ahead. We aren't on trail at this point, and twigs and leaves are completely shredding our faces, necks, legs, and arms. We hear this person, who's obviously running after us, start a hooting and hollering like some damn inbred from the hills have eyes. That makes us soil ourselves, and we run faster. We're sprinting, huffing and puffing like fat kids during the mile or something. The person is unfortunately closer at this point, and I look back and see him. He's an older guy, about 40s give or take, with long hair and thin as hell. He's scraggy looking. This, of course, makes me defecate pure cement. I yell at my girlfriend to hurry up, and she does. I look behind me again, and he is gaining on us. She makes a turn, and I recognize it as being the one to my house. The turn was abrupt, and I thank Jesus because the guy must have been too close to process the turn. We turn off and see the lights of my house in the almost darkness. Seeing this beacon of hope made us run even harder. This guy can't be seen, and we make it to my cleared backyard. My girlfriend runs up the back porch and rips the sliding door open, letting me in and locking it. She slams the blinds down to cover the door, and we make sure all the doors and windows are locked. I feel my back pocket for my phone, and realize that of course it's somewhere in those damn trees. My girlfriend's phone is dead. No house phone because who the hell has those anymore? It was a burden at the time. My girlfriend then breaks down having a panic or anxiety attack. I'm not sure which one. We plug in her phone, get it charging, and I turn off all the lights except for the ones by our doors. I saw no signs of the man for the rest of the night, and for the rest of the time I'd lived there. Her phone charged and we called the cops, and they surveyed the area and found nothing. It was terrifying for me, and I can only imagine it's worse for my girlfriend, who suffers from anxiety. I was in my early 30s and had been grieving the loss of my partner a few years earlier, so I regularly went walking alone with my two dogs. One was a bold little pug, and the other a ridgeback cross, but was a total wuss. I lived in a beautiful place, a temperate rainforest in a mountainous area of southern Australia. Many creeks and lots of tree fern forests. It's also sparsely populated due to the terrain, and on this occasion I was walking around the grassy oval by the creek on the outskirts of a small mountain village. Dealing with the grief had been difficult, and I often enjoyed a drink and a joint on these walks. It was time out for me though. I took a seat by the oval, cracked my bevo and sparked up, watching the dogs do their thing, just sniffing about. I'd been chilling for a few minutes when I notice an old guy walking his dog across the oval. I can see he's smoking and has a beer in his hand. My kind of person. As he gets closer, our dogs meet and play, and we soon get to chatting. I recognize his accent. He's from Liverpool, England. He's about 60 and lives with his elderly mother in this town. We're just chatting away for a good half hour, having a nice time on this cool autumn day. He's an interesting guy, so we plan to maybe catch up for a coffee next time I'm in the area. He doesn't have a mobile, so he writes down his home phone number for me on a scrap of paper. Cool, new friend. So conversation turns to when and how he came to Australia. 11 years ago he arrives, he tells me. I ask what prompted the move. Suddenly, it gets weird. He killed a guy, stabbed him in Liverpool, fled the country and came here. You heard that right. What the hell? So I wind things up pretty quickly now, but still trying to make it seem casual and normal. Hustle the dogs in the car, tell the dude that we'll catch up, and hightail it out of there. It's been at least 5 years since this incident, but I haven't been back to that area since, just in case I run into that murderous scouse again. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's installment. If of course you did, it would be absolutely fantastic for you to share this and drop a like, leave a comment with your thoughts. If you're new here, why not subscribe and press the bell icon for good measure, because we have new scary stories every night. So that would be pretty cool. If you have a story to share, feel free to send it to my email or post it to my Reddit, because that's pretty cool too. Just make sure you post it with plenty of punctuation, paragraphing, and description. That's extra important. Otherwise, I might be inclined to not read it, because it needs to be well written. Otherwise, when you listen back to it in a video, it just sounds bad. Anyway, with that being said, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.